The 1930s marked the high point for the great ocean-going liners. These were huge ships that carried thousands of passengers. The first-class passengers enjoyed the height of luxury and elegance. Competition was fierce, and national pride was at stake. France's finest ship was the Normandie. Britain's answer was the Queen Mary. In an epic contest of speed, they went head-to-head to win the Blue Riband and to be the fastest across the Atlantic. On December 1st, 1930, work began at John Brown's shipyard, Clydebank, on a new ship, job number 534. Like all the ships created before her in this yard, she would be hand-built by an army of Scotland's finest craftsmen. And she would only be given a name when she was launched. But 534 was to be something extra special. She would be bigger and faster than any ship yet built. The largest moving structure ever created by man. She would be a luxury liner of epic proportions, the new flagship of the Cunard White Star Line. And she was designed to win the Blue Riband of the Atlantic, the ultimate status symbol, awarded to the ship making the fastest crossing. A title in name only, but the holy grail for the great shipping lines.
It was really a marketing thing. The companies realized people would flock to a ship which held the Blue Riband. They can say they've traveled on the fastest ship in the world.
It was very prestigious. That's how you got passengers to sail with you. Even if it meant knocking off only an hour or so, to travel on the fastest ship on the North Atlantic was very important. It put passengers in your ships.
The only way to reach America was by ship, and the transatlantic trade was big business. The giant Cunarder had to compete in a crowded, cutthroat market. The great liners were symbols of national pride, each one larger and more luxurious than the last, in a bid to capture the traffic. But this great ship, the pride of Britain, would not have things all her own way. The French, too, had plans for a superliner. 8 weeks after Britain started building the vessel that would become the Queen Mary, work began on a rival ship at the Saint-Nazaire shipyard, job number T6.
The French decided to introduce a liner which could beat the foreign opposition. A fast liner, which would be a 5-day ship. To make a 5-day crossing, the ship would have to achieve a speed of 30 knots.
She too would be a Leviathan. Like the new Cunarder, she would be over 1,000 feet long. The French were also after the Blue Riband, and they were about to create a legend. These ships would not only be gigantic, they would be stylish. Celebrated artists were commissioned to decorate their interiors. The finest materials would be used to create 2 sumptuous, opulent, fabulous ocean liners.
They were literally floating cities, they were palaces, but not only had to show the most rudimentary, fundamental grasp of engineering principles that made it work, but the scale of the thing zoomed way up into the frivolous, the self-indulgent, the massaging of egos, the backdrop for the elegant and the rich.
And above all, they had to be fast. Fast enough to win and to keep the Blue Riband of the Atlantic. But these were dreams for the future. First came the steelwork.
It's a dire place to work, but it's exciting. There is nothing to match the excitement of watching huge furnaces open and massive beams being pulled out and bent with hydraulic machines. and guillotines that slice through steel like scissors cutting through paper. Frightening stuff, and of course people get injured and killed and maimed and blinded on a regular basis. And the idea of health and safety was just out the window, you know. It was only sissies that thought about health and safety. In a shipyard, you had extraordinarily skillful people that were batter and hammer and required strength, required physical endurance to be out there in all kinds of weather, earning money, you know, tough, hard wee guys.
As the frame grew into a bewildering labyrinth of steelwork, the shell plating began to give shape and form to the hull. The edges of each huge steel plate were punched with a row of closely spaced holes. They were then secured by the highly skilled process of hot riveting, a craft that was passed down from father to son.
Riveters were literally legends in Clydeside because of the way of this kind of peculiar clan system formed. Riveters worked in squads. Basically, you had a right-hand riveter and a left-hand riveter because both of them stood on each side of the rivet, so one swung a hammer to the left, one swung a hammer to the right. You had a boy who was in charge of the rivet furnace who heated the rivets. And then you had a guy called a hodder-on who holds on with a great hammer. The process was the rivet was heated white hot. It was thrown up to the hodder-on who would put it through the rivet hole. He would then hold a great hammer at the back of it, and the left and right hand riveter would bang on each end of the rivets to flatten them. Now, it would take approximately 8 to 16 hits to actually flatten one of those rivets.
It was a deafening and exhausting job, which would be repeated 10 million times before hull number 534 was finished. As work progressed rapidly, the towering structure became a landmark which dominated Clydebank, a proud symbol of Scotland's industrial might. But in the Cunard boardroom, it was another story. The Wall Street crash of 1929 had triggered a worldwide recession. Everybody hoped that better times were just around the corner, but they didn't come. The banks lost their nerve and withdrew finance for the new Cunarder. The government refused to help. Austerity, not luxury, was now the order of the day.
Building a ship like that's a very complicated and long process, even before you get to lay the first steel. So the momentum behind that had already been established, and Cunarder proceeds on the basis that it isn't going to get any worse. And of course, when it does get worse, then you've got a completely new set of problems there. And they were stuck with this very expensive ship at Clydebank, which of course they had to suspend just for 1 year after the contract had been signed.
On Friday, the 11th of December 1931, all work was halted. Thousands were laid off. The local economy collapsed overnight.
If you consider that they'd been employing about 10,000 people in that yard, and now the numbers are down to a few hundred, then it gives you some indication of the scale of the catastrophe that happened in Clydebank town.
France was also deep in the grip of the Depression. But the French government was determined to keep the T6 project alive, whatever the cost, and continued to subsidize the work. By October 1932, the French ship was ready for launching.
J'étais au lancement.
I was at the launch. The launch of a big liner is a magnificent sight. Any launch is impressive, but a liner of that size, yes, it's terrific.
C'est formidable.
While the anonymous 534 rusted away on Clydebank, T6 was christened Normandie, with a magnum of the finest French champagne.
I saw it hit the hull. It was an unforgettable moment, you know. And the moment it broke, the ship began to slide.
Normandie took to the water in a blaze of publicity and Gallic pride.
Le lancement, c'est magnifique.
The launching is magnificent. You see the ship on the slipway. You see it descend gently into the water. It slides.
Il glisse.
The ship makes a wave behind, and the people that got too close were soaked. Right up to here.
Et les gens qui sont tout près.
People standing on both sides were
Les
soaked.
gens étaient mouillés.
It's magnificent to see a
C'est
launch.
magnifique à voir un lancement.
In Britain, there was a public outcry. Why should the French be allowed to humiliate us while our own symbol of national pride was left to rot? The government finally bowed to public opinion and agreed to subsidize the completion of the ship that would become the Queen Mary. Cunard had lost 2.5 precious years, but they were back in the race.
A great day for Clydeside. Work is resumed on the Cunarder number 534. Dockland in Glasgow is en fete and pipers are there to express the exuberant feelings with which the labourers enter the shipyard to get to work on the boat, as Clydesiders call the as yet unnamed ship.
With a pipe band at their head, the workers streamed back into John Brown shipyard on the 3rd of April, 1934.
This mass of humanity bursting forth like a great sea. It's the kind of turning point of the tide. That great tomb, that coffin that sat above the town, suddenly turned into something else. It became a focus of joy and a focus of pride again.
Work progressed at a feverish pace, and in 5 months, the ship was ready for launching.
Cheer upon cheer from the countless thousands who have waited in the drenching rain to witness the launching of the 534 greet their majesties.
Then Queen Mary stepped forward and christened the ship in her own name.
I am happy to name this ship the Queen Mary.
There's a silence overtakes the place. The contemplation, just a moment. And you see this thing weighing 35,000 tons, and it moves. And you just, it's that first, eighth of an inch, it moves and your heart starts to go. And you can just see everybody, management down, welder, plater, the crowd almost gasping as this thing goes because it's a city on the move and there is nothing like it. And it's surreal, it's utterly surreal. You had this sheer joy of creating something that was absolutely gigantic, that was in essence absolutely beautiful. And okay, maybe you only done a wee bit of it, but your wee bit was still in there, and it was solid, and it was measurable, and it was quantifiable. But there's that enormous bond, just in that split second, the whole of that society just merges together. It's a birth.
Hull number 534 had become the Queen Mary. Now she had to be fitted out.
The fitting out, of course, takes another 1.5 years to complete, and when you're fitting out a ship like that, then it's just a vast army of different trades, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, you name it, they're all in there.
Interior decorators, plasterers for beautiful coving and ballrooms and glaziers and people who make stained glass windows and just enormous amounts of skills, actually all focused in building this city, this luxurious city that was going to sail the seas.
Meanwhile, in France, work was already well advanced as another army of craftsmen installed an even more lavish interior on the Normandie.
Le jardin d'hiver, le grand salon et quelques décorations murales.
This ship is designed to be the biggest, the fastest. It's built into the teeth of the Depression at the cost of something like $60 million in 1932, which is a lot of money today. So there was a big investment, and it represents the finest in French art, French engineering, French cuisine.
Pour Normandie, on n'a pas fait à l'économie.
On the Normandy, we didn't make economies. We didn't seek to economize on the materials, the design, etc., etc. We made whatever was most beautiful. We were not concerned with the price or with the consequences. You can say that Normandy was a luxury liner, a first-class liner.
De première classe.
Every piece of gold-colored metal on the ship that you saw was 24-karat gold-plated, which is just unbelievable.
It had been traditional for a liner's public rooms to mimic the interiors of grand hotels and stately homes. But the Normandie's designers wanted a modern feel and created an entirely new interior style. This was not a building, it was a ship, and proud of it. She had taken more than 4 years to build, but at last Normandie was ready to make her bid for the Blue Riband.
A new ship, the pride of France, sails on her maiden voyage. The world has waited for this moment, and the question asked again and again is, will this 80,000-ton streamlined giant wrest the blue riband of the Atlantic? Perhaps she may, but then we in Britain are waiting with eager longing for our own champion, the Queen Mary.
At 6:19 p.m. on May the 29th, 1935, Normandie left her home port of Le Havre and set sail for America. 50,000 people gathered on the quayside to see her off.
Accompagnons le paquebot géant au cours de cette première traversée.
At 10 a.m. on the morning of May the 30th, Normandie passed the Bishop Rock Lighthouse off the Cornish coast, which marked the start of the timed run across the Atlantic. French Line stated they were not out to break the record on the Normandie's first trip. But there was a growing sense of excitement on board as her speed steadily increased to more than 30 knots. No liner had ever traveled at this speed before.
It really was amazing, and to move that ship through the water at something over 30 knots, I mean, you could water ski behind that ship, it was that fast.
The Normandie's secret weapon was her revolutionary hull. It had been designed by an unknown naval architect, Vladimir Yurkevich, a refugee who had fled communist Russia in 1919. Conventional hulls, like the Queen Mary's, had a straight-edged bow to cut through the water. But Yurkevich created a radical new shape, a curved bow which bulged out at keel level, but actually cut the water more efficiently.
The Normandy was really revolutionary in almost every respect, whereas the Queen Mary was evolutionary. Normandy had this vast turbo-electric power system where steam turbines produced electricity and then electric motors would drive the propellers. And it's what we use today in modern cruise ships.
Jusqu'à Normandie, on avait des cheminées.
Until the Normandy, funnels were vertical, straight. With the Normandy, we had an entirely original, aerodynamic shape. There were 3 funnels, but in reality, the third funnel did nothing. The third funnel was purely aesthetic. You know, in the third funnel, there were the dog kennels.
Il avait une vue extérieure magnifique.
It had a magnificent exterior.
Vraiment très joli.
Really lovely.
Il était différent des autres navires.
It was different from other ships. Its funnels, its bow, everything about this ship was new.
Enfin, il était nouveau. Voilà.
At 11:02, on the morning of June the 4th, 1935, the Normandie passed the Ambrose Light off New York, the finishing point for the Blue Riband course. She had made the crossing in just 4 days, 3 hours, and 2 minutes. A new record. As she proudly steamed into New York Harbor, a giant blue pennant streamed out from her masthead.
Normandie arbore le ruban bleu. Normandie, le plus grand paquebot du monde.
French line had clearly come prepared for a victory celebration. The Blue Ribbon was no longer just a title. It was a flag, 30 meters long. One for every knot of speed to reflect the glory that was France. Now it was Scotland's turn. On the 24th of March 1936, the Queen Mary left her birthplace on Clydebank, ready to avenge Britain's lost honour.
And then that ship suddenly leaves, you know, and it's about to fulfil its purpose. Then they sort of pull it out the dock and it turns round, you know. But it's not for you. The very second it leaves that dock, it's away for another life. It was a luxury trade. You'd served your purpose. You'd done your bit. It now belonged to those who could afford to grace the decks. And it is never going to return because you can't get it back up the river again. That's it. It is gone forever.
A year after the Normandie had captured the Blue Riband, the Queen Mary prepared to set out on her maiden voyage from Southampton. One of those lucky enough to get a ticket was Heather Beagley.
It was so fantastically popular and such a landmark. Everybody wanted to go on it if they could afford it, and it was rather like going to the moon or something like that in those days.
14-year-old Heather was still at school, and everything depended on getting permission from her headmistress.
But of course it was tremendously exciting when a letter came from her to say, yes, I could go. It would be an education in itself, and she wished she was coming too.
I'm happy and gay 'cause I'm sailing away. I booked my trip for the USA on the finest ship in the world, the Queen Mary. How'd you like to come with me?
Well, when we approached it, you can't really see the whole ship because it's so fantastically big. You've never seen a building, let alone a ship as big as that. And so you look to the left and you look to the right and you cannot believe there's a ship quite as big as that. And there were hundreds, thousands of people lining the quay, and bunting and flags and ships and hooters and everything you could imagine.
At 4:30 p.m., the Queen Mary cast off from the dockside in Southampton. Cunard staunchly denied that they were after the speed record as the Mary began her crossing. Few believed them.
There was this great feeling of patriotism, and there was a great rivalry to win the Blue Riband. Everybody wanted it to do well, and it was very important to the British that we went faster than anybody else.
It's a wonderful feeling, naturally. Going out to sea, you've probably put her on half ahead until you get a few miles away and then ring off full ahead for New York and tell the engineers to build up to 176 revolutions a minute, which you know is over 29 knots. It is a great feeling of exhilaration.
As the Queen Mary headed out into the Atlantic, her passengers had time to explore their new surroundings.
Well, you have a little feeling of home in your cabin, and there you feel you're safe and you know where you are. But when you go walkabout, you have no idea where you are, because there are corridors stretching in front of you as far as you can see. There are innumerable companionways which you walk up and down. There are lifts. It's just like a world that you're going to get lost in. The whole ship was most glamorous. All the materials were of the best quality they could find. It amazes me at the time of the recession that they could afford it. But everything was mahogany or maple or rosewood or some very good wood. Beautifully done, and everything was of the best quality. Chandeliers, wonderful lighting, uplighting, which was very modern for those days. Just fantastic. Big bronze doors, bronze surrounds to the doors, everything shining and bright and polished. And the style of it was the epitome of Art Deco, which was just the fashion at that moment.
Each night, Heather recorded her impressions in her diary.
Wednesday, May the 27th, 1936. I'm in room B 136 with 3 other ladies. It is very exciting because this is the maiden trip of the Queen Mary. Went to sleep.
The Queen Mary was about to make her bid for the Blue Riband.
New York bound at last, the Queen Mary on her maiden voyage. She represents the restoration of Britain's supremacy on the seas. With her goes the hopes and pride of a nation. May fortune bless her in all her voyages.
Deep down in the bowels of the ship, the huge engines continued to drive the Queen Mary forward at 30 knots. This was where the Blue Riband would be won or lost, and Cunard knew it. Without the benefit of the Normandie's revolutionary hull, their solution was to pile on the horsepower.
Now, they were in a race with the French, and of course they didn't know what the French were going to do. So the Cunard Company had to ensure there was an extra margin on Queen Mary to make sure that come hell or high water, they would win the accolade on the North Atlantic and have the fastest ship. Cunard were able to develop the engines up to 210,000 shaft horsepower.
12 decks up, far from the roar of the turbines, all that horsepower was controlled at the touch of a lever by the captain and his navigating officers on the bridge.
The feeling of going at 30 knots and passing everything else that you could see going in the same direction was a wonderful feeling.
As the Mary passed the halfway point, the signs were good. She was proving to be just as fast as the Normandie. It looked as if the Blue Riband could be about to change hands. But as the Queen Mary neared the coast of America, she ran into fog. On the bridge, her captain faced an agonizing dilemma. The whole world was watching and confidently expected a new record. But the loss of the Titanic, only 24 years earlier, still haunted the Cunard White Star Line. Another maiden voyage to disaster was just too awful to contemplate. Very reluctantly, the Queen Mary's captain ordered the engine room to reduce speed. The Blue Riband slipped from her grasp. The Ambrose Light was passed in 4 days, 5 hours and 46 minutes, almost 3 hours slower than the Normandie. The French nation breathed a sigh of relief.
Everybody wanted it to go faster than anything else. We all hoped they'd beat the record, and they didn't.
The Queen Mary may not have won the Blue Riband, but her welcome as she steamed into New York Harbor was, if anything, even more ecstatic than the Normandie's 1 year earlier.
The reception in New York was way beyond anything we'd seen as a farewell in Britain. The people of New York got wildly excited about it.
Never discount the American taste for royalty. I mean, it's alive and well. If she had been named the Nelson or something like that, probably wouldn't have had the same reception as the Queen Mary.
The skyscrapers, of course, were fantastic, and we saw the Statue of Liberty as we came in. The fire ships came out and played all their hoses in welcome. That I found very exciting.
The Queen Mary was a huge hit with the Americans, and passengers flocked to travel on her. But the French still held the blue ribbon, and the world waited for Cunard's next move. 3 months later, on only her 6th round trip, the full force of the Queen Mary's engines was unleashed as she raced her way across the Atlantic in just under 4 days. 3 hours faster than the Normandie. A victory for Britain. Privately, Cunard knew that winning the blue ribbon was great for business, but in public, they played the safety card and firmly denied any interest in speed records. Their chairman announced that they did not wish to encourage a race. And speed came at a price.
A scheduled speed of 28.5 knots costs a great deal of money, but if she, for some reason, had to go up to something like 31 knots, the oil fuel consumption was unbelievably high. So you didn't go up to that speed because it cost too much money.
Cunard's victory was followed by an informal truce, and both liners settled down into the routine of running a regular service across the Atlantic. The Normandie might have lost the blue ribbon, but she still had a magic all her own.
La mer qu'on voit danser le long des golfes clairs.
The world that the passengers experienced was all about service and unashamed luxury.
La mer, les reflets chauds.
In good weather, an Atlantic crossing could be a glorious 5-day cruise, bracing walks around the open deck, breathing in the sea air and playing a daily round of deck sports in the sunshine, or simply doing nothing at all.
Le plaisir d'être en mer et de voyager en mer.
The pleasure of being at sea and on the move. That's a pleasure, a real pleasure.
Un vrai plaisir. Un bateau est
A ship is alive, and you never know what may befall you. You are a very small thing in this universe when you cross the ocean.
dans l'océan.
And if you wanted refreshments, cigarettes, something to read, there was always a steward close by to oblige.
La mer, les aberrations.
When the sea air became a little too bracing, you could retreat below deck to be amazed by the grand interiors, which had helped to make the Normandie twice as expensive as the Queen Mary to build. For the fabulously rich, there were suites of rooms with panoramic windows and sun decks. For those who were merely rich, there were cabins, smaller but finished to the same exacting standards. But it was the grands salons which really took the breath away.
You had a huge dining room, 22 meters longer than the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. It was quite impressive, and 9 meters 50 high.
The main dining salon, with its walls of engraved glass, could accommodate over 700 at a single sitting.
C'était une chose primordiale pour les passagers.
The food was the basic thing for the passengers. They ate well, the boat was comfortable, it went fast enough. That's the main thing. That's all they want. And good service.
Et d'être bien servi.
It was easy to fall under the Normandie's spell, losing all sense of time and place. The air of unreality was increased on several crossings when the crew actually outnumbered the passengers, for the Normandie often ran half empty and never made a profit. She represented the glory of France, and the French taxpayer picked up the bill. And suddenly, the spell was broken. There was the Statue of Liberty and the skyscrapers of Manhattan. The dream was over. Two days later, another select group of passengers would enter the fairy tale world of the Normandie for the return voyage to Europe. But most people simply couldn't afford to travel on her. Many of those who could found her style overpowering and actually preferred the Queen Mary's more sedate atmosphere.
We take particular pleasure in presenting the ship's dance orchestra under the leadership of Bunny Rowe.
The Queen Mary may have cost half as much as the Normandie, but she could still dazzle her passengers. Her grandest room was the first-class dining saloon, the largest single room ever seen on board an ocean liner. Rich wood and elaborate lighting created a warm and lush interior, quite unlike the Normandie's glittering palace of gold and glass. The room's centerpiece was a gigantic map of the North Atlantic, which indicated the Queen Mary's position as she sped across the ocean.
The dining room was really magnificent, absolutely splendid. The decor was fantastic. Everything was glamorous and really best quality. We were at a dining room table, of course, a round table with a vase of beautiful red roses in the middle. The food was very good, and of course I'd never seen menus like it in my life. I'm sure at dinner in the evening it would have been at least 6 courses. And it was delicious, and one had a little bit of everything, because in those days, it seems incredible now, and I don't know why we weren't all enormously fat. You had a proper meal at lunchtime, and you had a fabulous dinner in the evening.
If you were a steward, which the majority of the crew were, you started at the bottom, and you worked up. You were good in 3rd class, you would get promoted to 2nd class, and so on. And of course, these stewards all lived by their tips. Tips was the business, and that's how you made your money. Their wages were a pittance, but if you were a good steward in 1st class, you would pay off the ship with more money in your pocket than some of the senior officers on the ship.
After dinner, you could take it easy in one of the grand lounges, or dance the night away to the strains of the Queen Mary's very own orchestra.
Through some friend of my father's, I was introduced to a man who was 43, and he and I danced every evening, and that was great. And I heard the other ladies in my cabin one night when I was supposed to be asleep say, "I don't know how that girl managed to find a gigolo, do you?" And I thought this was a very funny word, which I'd never heard before. So I said to my mother, "What's a gigolo?" And my mother said, "A very nice man, dear, who's good at dancing."
The Queen Mary's blue ribbon status and 5-star service made her the most popular ship on the North Atlantic. She was flying the flag for Britain. But the French had not built the Normandie to be a runner-up. All that money had been spent to create a world leader, and that meant recapturing the blue ribbon at any cost. At the start of 1937, the Normandie was in dock for her winter refit.
By the way, the Normandie is being fitted with new propellers. There isn't any definite news as yet, but does it mean that the Normandie is going to renew her challenge for the blue ribbon of the Atlantic?
It did. The Normandie promptly regained her title, shaving 55 minutes off the Queen Mary's record time. Now she looked unbeatable. Even the British newsreels couldn't resist singing her praises.
Using her new propellers for the first time, the 83,000-ton Normandie has crossed the Atlantic just over a quarter of a knot faster than the best time of the 80,000-ton Queen Mary, So now France claims the blue ribbon. Congratulations, Normandy. How about it, Queen Mary?
In July 1938, the Normandie made her 100th crossing of the Atlantic. But this was to be the high point for the Normandie. The tide was about to turn against her. The very next month, the Queen Mary regained the blue ribbon, with a crossing speed just half a knot faster than the Normandie. In the best sporting tradition, Normandie's captain sent a cordial message. Bravo to the Queen Mary, until the next time. But world events were catching up with the transatlantic passenger business. In Europe, Adolf Hitler's Germany was beginning to threaten the peace. Refugees were soon streaming west across the Atlantic to the safety of America. Americans thought it safer to stay at home, as Europe braced itself for war. On the 23rd of August 1939, the Normandie left Le Havre on her 139th Atlantic crossing. A week later, the Queen Mary left Southampton with a full load of passengers. As she approached New York, the news reached her that Britain had declared war on Germany. For 5 months, the great rivals Normandie and Queen Mary were laid up side by side in New York. On March the 21st, the Queen Mary, now wearing a coat of battleship grey paint, slipped her moorings and left the Normandie behind, as she headed off for Australia to be fitted as a troop ship. Within 2 months, France had been overrun by Hitler's forces and suffered a crushing defeat. The once proud Normandie was marooned. In December 1941, America entered the war, and the mothballed Normandie was requisitioned by the US government for conversion into a troop ship.
The ship is then stripped of all its possessions, all of the furniture, fixtures, equipment, all of the artwork. The murals are dismantled and taken off the ship. There were 2,500 van loads of material taken to government warehouses, and the law required that it had to be sold.
Then, disaster struck. A careless workman burning through steelwork in the Grand Lounge accidentally set fire to a pile of life jackets. The blaze quickly got out of control.
And then they have a terrible time because they don't know how to operate the fire control system. They're going 3 compartments away with buckets of water, tripping, falling, dumping the water, and this fire begins to really rage in the Grand Salon.
Soon, the upper part of the ship was burning fiercely, and hundreds of tons of water were pumped in to fight the flames. But the fire continued to spread, while the weight of water trapped on the upper decks began to unbalance the ship. Thousands of sightseers watched in horror as she began to list alarmingly. Among them was the Normandie's original designer, Vladimir Yurkevich, who was now working for the American government. He frantically tried to explain to the US Navy officials that he could stop the ship rolling over.
Yurkevich's answer is to open the seacocks and let the water come in and let it settle down on the bottom, which is not very much below the keel, and let it rest there and then pump it out and save the ship. Nobody would listen to him.
The Navy was in charge, and less than 12 hours after the fire broke out, the mighty Normandie snapped her mooring ropes and slowly rolled over. The pride of France was reduced to a smoking wreck, and her legendary duel with the Queen Mary was over.
Tragic loss. I think it's sort of a metaphor for the times. Fighting its way into existence through the Depression, this glorious existence through the 30s, the glamour and sort of hedonistic life aboard ship, and then all of a sudden the cataclysm. And in the World Society, we saw the same thing. We saw the World War II, it changed forever.
Un bateau perd toujours un peu de sa popularité.
A boat will always lose some of its popularity with time. At first it's very well known, a celebrity. And then towards the end, it loses some of its aura. But when the Normandy went in the flower of its youth, very young, it hit the French very hard. And that's why its memory still lives in the hearts and minds of the French people.
Reste aussi vivant dans le cœur et dans la mémoire des Français.
The Queen Mary survived the war and carried thousands of troops safely across the oceans of the world. On one trip, she carried no less than 15,000 American troops to the European battlefront. When victory came at last, she was refitted as a passenger liner once again and spent many profitable years sharing the Atlantic run with her younger sister, the Queen Elizabeth. By the 1960s, air travel was beginning to dominate the transatlantic passenger business. The ocean could now be crossed in hours rather than days, and Cunard's profits began to suffer. After 31 years of service, the Queen Mary was withdrawn in 1967 and sold to an American company. Today, she is a floating hotel, permanently moored at Long Beach, California, the sole survivor of the great pre-war transatlantic liners.
There's so many aspects actually imbued in the ship itself that it's a symbol. It's enormously complex, but its symbolism goes from the minute, the mundane, the trivial, all the way through to the grand and the glorious of an empire. And I think that's why it holds that kind of magic. And of course, she is Scottish, i.e. she was built here. We built that ship, we built that ship here. Don't you forget it, lads, you know?
But her arch-rival, the Normandie, has long ago passed into legend.
Je rêve encore du Normandie.
I still dream about the Normandy. Oh yes, it was a really sensational ship, but oh well, it's gone now.
Say goodbye now. I'm leaving those clouds.
For 3 incredible years, from 1936 to 1939, these two great ships ruled the waves. Together, they created the golden age of the ocean liners in their heroic quest to be the fastest across the Atlantic.